Now that we know what a do-while loop is and how it works in a program, one thing that I want all of you to do is make this condition false in the first execution itself and see how the do-while loop and the while loop will behave. Having said that, let us now proceed to the next loop, and that is our for loop. Now this for loop is also known as our counter loop, and the reason as to why it is called a counter loop is because it needs something known as a counter variable. Once we have the counter variable, we define a condition based on this counter variable, and then we form an expression which changes our counter variable. Pay close attention to these semicolons in between. The next point says that the for loop, it allows automatic initialization of our counter variable. Now what this means is that if we declare a variable by the name I, it will automatically be in, and this initialization will depend on the data type associated with the variable. In this case, since I am making use of an integer data type, it will automatically be initialized to a value of 0. Now if you are making use of other data types like our double, float and string, it will be initialized to 0.0 for the float, 0.0 for the double and null for the string. You should go code and check that out. Now that we know what a for loop is and we have even seen the syntax for our for loop, let us now see the for loop in action. Now this is a very simple program, and this program prints the table for 5 by making use of our for loop. Let us now see how this line of codes is able to print a table for 5. Now if you carefully observe the line of code inside of the main function, you will see that in the first line I have declared a variable by the name of table, which is of integer data type, and I have initialized it with the value of 5, since 5 is the table which we want to print. Then in the next line I have made use of the for loop for the 5 zeros are 0 to 5 tens are 50 thing. Now if you look closely at this particular line, you'll see that out here I have declared and initialized a variable I, and then I have provided a condition which will go true until the value of I is greater than 10. And out here I've made use of an expression so that the value of I changes every time the loop runs, and because of which we do not enter into something known as our infinite loop. Now when this line gets executed, a variable I is initialized with a value 0, and then our condition is checked. It sees if I is less than or equal to 10, which is actually true. Once this condition evaluates to true, the control enters our for loop and execute this printf statement, because of which we are able to get our first line, and that is 5 0 are 0. Now what happens inside here is that the value for table goes in here, so we get 5, then this is a character capital X, and then the value for I goes to the second %d, which in this case will be 0, and then equal will be printed as it is, and the multiplication for table into I goes and sits over here, and hence we get 5 into 0 equals 0 in our first loop. After the execution of this particular statement, our control again returns to the beginning of the for loop. But before it checks this condition, it increments the value of I from 0 to 1 so that our current I value is 1 and not 0 anymore. And then once the value gets incremented from 0 to 1, the condition checking again happens, and this process goes on and on until our I is equal to 11. Once the value for I becomes 11, this particular condition evaluates to false, and hence the control comes out of our for loop.